The crystalline dome stretched impossibly high above the assembly floor, its transparent walls pulsing with streams of light that carried the thoughts and voices of 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Marcus Kane stood alone at the center of the vast chamber, his black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast against the shimmering floor that reflected the forms of hundreds of alien beings towering around him like living monuments. The Galactic Council headquarters orbited the neutral star of Axiom Prime, a structure so massive it could be seen from 3 systems away. Within its halls, decisions were made that affected trillions of lives across the galaxy. Today, humanity faced judgment for the first time in their brief spacefaring history. Supreme Arbiter Thexhai materialized on the central platform, its form shifting between states of matter as ancient protocols activated. When it spoke, the voice resonated through every molecule in the chamber, bypassing ears and speaking directly to consciousness itself. Species designation human. Planet designation Earth. Representative Marcus Kane of the Terran Embassy. The words hung in the air like accusations. You stand before this council charged with the complete annihilation of the Vorthak Empire. 7 billion souls across 43 worlds vanished. How do you answer these charges? The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates from hundreds of species voiced their horror and outrage in languages that spanned the electromagnetic spectrum. Crystalline beings chimed in frequencies that made the walls ring. Gaseous entities swirled in agitated patterns. Mechanical representatives clicked and word in machine languages older than human civilization. Kane remained perfectly still throughout the tumult, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the fury with the patience of someone who had expected this reaction. His calm demeanor only seemed to intensify the alien's agitation. Silence. Thexhai's command cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The assembly fell quiet instantly, though the tension remained thick enough to taste. The human will answer. Kane stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the sudden stillness. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the massive chamber without technological amplification. A simple human trait that somehow seemed ominous in this context. Honored Arbiter, esteemed delegates of the Galactic Council. 6 months ago, the Vorthak Empire issued humanity an ultimatum. They demanded our complete surrender, the enslavement of our population and our children for their genetic experimentation programs. His voice never wavered, never showed emotion. We offered them peace. They chose war. Delegate Morthak of the Hegemony Worlds leaned forward, its multiple eyes focusing on Kane with predatory intensity. The Vorthak were a proud warrior race with a fleet of over 10,000 vessels. They had conquered 43 worlds in the past century alone. How does a species that achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago claim to have defeated such an empire? Kane's expression remained neutral. We didn't defeat them, Delegate Morthak. We gave them exactly what they asked for. Totaiva. We simply defined the terms. A ripple of unease passed through the assembly. The reptilian delegate Siskora spoke next, its forked tongue tasting the air. Explain these terms, human. The evidence shows Vorthak fleets found drifting in space, crews alive but unresponsive, cities abandoned without signs of bombardment, entire worlds surrendering without resistance. What weapons did you use? None that would be recognized as such by galactic law, Kane replied. We used psychology, culture, information, fear, hope, the very things that make sentient beings what they are. The Arbiter's form pulsed with what might have been confusion. Elaborate, human. The Council requires specifics. Kane began to pace slowly, his movements measured and deliberate. The Vorthak based their entire society on the concept of honorable combat. Face-to-face warfare. Glory in battle. They expected us to meet their fleets in space to fight their ground forces on contested worlds. Instead, we fought a war they didn't understand. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. When their first invasion fleet reached our outer colonies, they found the settlements apparently deserted. But as they landed and began their occupation, things began to happen. Equipment would malfunction in ways that defied explanation. Their warriors would see things that weren't there, hear voices of fallen comrades, experience memories that belonged to others. The chamber had grown completely silent. Every delegate hung on Kane's words with a mixture of fascination and growing horror. We had studied them, you see. Their culture, their psychology, their deepest fears and beliefs. We knew they venerated their ancestors, believed in spiritual communion with the dead, So we gave them exactly that the voices of every Vorthak warrior who had ever died in battle, speaking to them through their own communication systems. Delegate Zifara of the Crystal Communes vibrated at a frequency that translated as deep disturbance. You used their own beliefs against them? Made them question their reality? We made them confront the true cost of their way of life, Kane corrected. Every Vorthak warrior carries a genetic memory of their lineage's battles. We simply amplified those memories, made them experience every death, every moment of pain and loss their ancestors had endured. We showed them the weight of 10,000 years of conquest. The biological horrors of such psychological warfare began to dawn on the assembly. To attack the mind itself, to weaponize consciousness and memory. It was beyond anything the galaxy had imagined possible. Kane continued his explanation with clinical detachment. Within weeks, Vorthak commanders were reporting mass psychological breaks among their troops. Warriors who had never known fear suddenly couldn't function. Their chain of command collapsed as officers found themselves reliving the deaths of every being they had killed. "This is monstrous," whispered Delegate Talara of the Peaceful Concord. "To attack the very essence of what makes a being sentient is exactly what the Vorthak intended to do to humanity," Kane interrupted. "The difference is that we offered them a choice at every step. Surrender, seek therapy, relocate to neutral worlds, abandon their military culture. Many accepted. Those who didn't," he shrugged. "They experienced the logical conclusion of a society built on endless warfare." Supreme Arbiter Thexhai's form flickered rapidly. "The evidence suggests the Vorthak Empire has effectively ceased to exist. Where are the 7 billion Vorthak citizens?" For the first time, Kane smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "That honored arbiter depends on how you define existence. They are alive, healthy, and living on various worlds throughout the galaxy. They simply no longer identify as Vorthak. We offered them new identities, new cultures, new ways of thinking that didn't involve conquest and subjugation. Most chose to accept. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Vorthak Empire. They had erased it from existence by convincing its citizens to abandon everything that made them who they were." Kane addressed the shocked silence. "The galaxy declared war on humanity, expecting a simple military conflict. Instead, we showed you what monsters look like when they choose to be merciful. We could have killed every Vorthak in the galaxy. Instead, we saved them from themselves." He turned slowly, meeting the gaze of every delegate who would look at him. "The question now, honored members of the Council, is simple. Do you wish to treat humanity as friends and equals, or do you want to see what monsters look like when mercy is no longer an option?" The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the soft hum of the crystalline walls processing the collective thoughts of beings who suddenly understood they were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. Kane waited patiently for their answer, his hands still clasped behind his back, while the most powerful governing body in the galaxy grappled with the realization that humanity had just redefined the very nature of warfare itself. 6 months earlier, the emergency session of Earth's United Defense Council convened in the underground chambers beneath Geneva. The holographic displays showed the imposing Vorthak war fleet hanging in space beyond Pluto's orbiter, over 8,000 vessels, arranged in perfect military formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could glass entire continents. General Lisa Park stood before the assembled leaders of Earth's nations, her weathered face grim as she reviewed the alien ultimatum that had arrived 3 hours ago. The translation was unambiguous and terrifying in its simplicity. "They're giving us 72 hours," Park announced to the silent room. "Complete surrender of all human governments. Immediate cessation of all military activities. Submission to Vorthak authority and genetic harvesting protocols for our children." She paused, letting the words sink in. "They consider us primitives who achieved faster-than-light travel through luck rather than merit." President Amanda Cross of the North American Federation leaned forward. "What's our fleet strength compared to theirs?" Admiral James Norton answered from his position at the tactical display. "We have roughly 300 vessels capable of interstellar combat. Most are exploratory ships with minimal weaponry. They outgun us 30-1, and that's being generous about our capabilities." The chamber erupted in urgent whispers as the reality of their situation became clear. Earth had been spacefaring for only 50 years. Their technology was crude compared to established galactic civilizations. By every metric that mattered to interstellar warfare, humanity was doomed. Director Rebecca Foster of the Strategic Intelligence Division cleared her throat. There's another consideration. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected increased Galactic Council traffic in this sector. They're watching to see how this plays out. Watching, repeated Chancellor Klaus Weber of the European Union with bitter irony. Not intervening, why would they? General Park's voice carried decades of military experience. From their perspective, this is just another conquest. The Vorthak have done this dozens of times before. Young species get absorbed into their empire, become slave labor and breeding stock. It's considered normal galactic politics. Foster stood, activating a new set of displays that showed psychological profiles and cultural analyses. However, there's something the Vorthak don't understand about humanity, something the galaxy doesn't understand. The assembled leaders turned their attention to her presentation. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing data that seemed to have little connection to military strategy. Every other species the Vorthak have conquered developed in relative isolation until they achieved spaceflight. They had millennia of peace to advance their technology before encountering other hostile civilizations. Foster manipulated the display, highlighting Earth's historical timeline. Humanity is different. We've been at war with ourselves for our entire recorded history. Admiral Norton frowned. How does that help us against superior technology and numbers? Because we've had to become very, very good at warfare, Foster replied. Not just the mechanical aspects or the psychological ones. Every human conflict has been a laboratory for understanding how to break enemy morale, how to turn their strengths into weaknesses, how to win wars without destroying what you're trying to capture. She activated another display showing comparative military histories. The Vorthak fight honorable wars, face-to-face combat, clear battle lines, victory through superior force. It's efficient against most species because it minimizes casualties and infrastructure damage. Foster paused, but they've never fought an enemy that considers psychological warfare as natural as breathing. General Park studied the data with growing interest. You're suggesting we don't fight their kind of war. I'm suggesting we fight the only kind of war humanity has ever truly mastered, Foster corrected. Total war. Not the destruction of their bodies, the destruction of their will to fight. President Cross looked skeptical. Against 8,000 ships and a warrior culture that's conquered dozens of worlds? Foster smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. Madam President, in the past century alone, humanity has produced more fiction, games, simulations, and theoretical scenarios about warfare than the rest of the galaxy combined. We've imagined every possible way to fight and defeat enemies. We've run millions of simulations of asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, and cultural manipulation. She gestured to the displays showing Earth's entertainment and academic industries. Every science fiction novel, every strategy game, every war movie, every philosophical discussion about the nature of conflict. It's all been preparation for this moment. We've been training our entire species for a war we didn't know was coming. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity's seemingly chaotic and violent history wasn't a weakness. It was an evolutionary advantage that no other species possessed. Admiral Norton was the first to speak. What exactly are you proposing? Foster activated a new presentation labeled Operation Mirror. The title seemed innocuous, but the content made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Vorthak base their entire society on ancestor worship and the glory of battle. Their warriors carry genetic memories of their lineage's victories. It's how they maintain cultural cohesion across hundreds of worlds. Foster highlighted specific psychological profiles, but those memories also include every defeat, every moment of pain, every doubt their ancestors ever experienced. General Park began to understand. You want to weaponize their own history against them. I want to show them the true cost of 10,000 years of conquest, Foster corrected. Every Vorthak warrior believes they're carrying on a noble tradition, but they've never experienced the cumulative weight of all the suffering they've caused. She displayed technical schematics for devices that looked more like medical equipment than weapons. Our neuroscience teams have developed amplification technology based on our studies of human trauma and memory. We can broadcast specific neural patterns that will resonate with Vorthak genetic memory structures. President Cross studied the plans with growing alarm. This is torture on a civilizational scale. No, Foster said firmly. This is education. We're not creating false memories or causing physical harm. We're simply making them experience the full truth of their own history, instead of the sanitized version their culture provides. Chancellor Weber raised his hand. And if they refuse to surrender even after experiencing this, education? Foster's expression grew cold. Then we escalate. Humanity has imagined some truly terrible things over the centuries. The Vorthak worship their ancestors? We'll give them conversations with every being their lineage ever killed. They value honor in combat? We'll show them what honor looks like from the perspective of their victims. Admiral Norton was studying the technical specifications. How do we deploy this? Our fleet can't get close enough to their ships to implement these systems. We don't need to get close to their ships, Foster replied. We need to get close to their minds. And for that, we use the one advantage we have that they don't expect. She activated a final display showing communication logs from the Vorthak fleet. They've been broadcasting demands and threats on open channels for the past 3 hours. Every transmission gives us more data about their neural patterns, their cultural references, their psychological structures. They're literally giving us the keys to their own minds. General Park was already thinking tactically. How long do you need to prepare the initial deployment? 6 hours for basic psychological warfare packages. 12 hours for full cultural manipulation protocols. 24 hours if we want to implement permanent belief structure modifications. The room fell into contemplative silence. What Foster was proposing went beyond military strategy into something that felt like playing God with the minds of an entire species. Yet the alternative was extinction for humanity. President Cross spoke first. If we do this, if we actually implement these psychological weapons, what happens to us as a species? How do we come back from crossing this line? Foster met her gaze steadily. Madam President, humanity crossed this line the first time one of our ancestors looked at an enemy and decided that physical defeat wasn't enough, that they needed to break their spirit as well. We've been refining these techniques for millennia. The only difference is that now we're applying them to aliens instead of each other. Admiral Norton was already activating communication protocols. I'll begin coordinating with our deep space assets. How do we respond to their ultimatum? General Park looked around the room at the assembled leaders of humanity. Each face reflected the same grim understanding that they were about to make a decision that would define their species' place in the galaxy, forever. We send them a response, she said finally. We accept their declaration of war. We give them 72 hours to withdraw their ultimatum and seek peaceful resolution. She paused. And we tell them this is their only warning. Foster was already gathering her files.
I'll begin implementing the psychological warfare protocols immediately.
By the time their deadline expires, we'll be ready to show the Vorthak what happens when they try to intimidate a species that has spent 10,000 years learning how to break minds. The mining colony of New Geneva hung in the void like a cluster of steel and ceramic mushrooms, sprouting from the asteroid's surface. When the Vorthak invasion fleet arrived, their sensors detected exactly what they expected, i.e., small human outpost with minimal defenses and a population of roughly 12,000 civilians who had apparently evacuated in panic. War Commander Thakvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical displays with satisfaction. The humans had abandoned their outer colonies without a fight, just as intelligence had predicted. Their species was proving to be as cowardly as they were primitive. Begin landing operations, he commanded his crew. Standard occupation protocols. Secure the mining facilities and establish a forward base for the next phase of conquest. The first wave of Vorthak warriors descended to New Geneva's surface in atmospheric assault craft, their power armor gleaming with the ceremonial markings of a proud military heritage. They moved through the abandoned corridors with practiced efficiency, securing strategic points and establishing communication relays. It was Warrior Kethran who first noticed something wrong. His squad was clearing the residential section when he detected movement in his peripheral vision. A shadow that shouldn't have been there, moving in a way that defied the station's artificial gravity. Motion detected. Section 7, he reported through his helmet communicator. Investigating. But when he turned to face the disturbance, there was nothing there. Only empty corridors and the soft hum of life support systems that should have been powered down if the station was truly abandoned. Similar reports began filtering in from other squads. Shadows where none should exist. Equipment that activated by itself. Doors that opened and closed without explanation. The rational part of Thokvar's mind knew these were probably automated systems or environmental glitches, but something about the reports made his ancestral memories stir uneasily. The Vorthak had conquered 43 worlds in the past century, but they had never encountered anything like what began happening in New Geneva's depths. It started with the sound of voices, whispers in the ancient Vorthak tongue speaking words that no living being should know. Warrior Greknos was the first to break. He was securing the main computer core when he heard his grandfather's voice speaking to him through his helmet communicator. But his grandfather had died in the conquest of Meridian 7, 20 years before Greknos was even born. "Why do you continue the cycle, child of my blood?" the voice asked with intimate familiarity. "How many more must die for the glory you seek?" Greknos spun around, weapon raised, but found only empty air and the gentle hum of computers. His vital signs spiked as ancestral memories that weren't his own began flooding his consciousness. Images of his grandfather dying alone and afraid, not gloriously as family legend claimed, but screaming for mercy that never came. The phenomenon spread through the Vorthak forces like a plague. Warriors began reporting conversations with dead relatives, experiencing memories of battles they had never fought, feeling the pain of wounds that had been inflicted on their ancestors generations ago. Dr. Rebecca Foster monitored the psychological attack from Earth's command center, watching as her carefully designed neural warfare protocols took effect. The technology was elegant in its simplicity. Quantum communication arrays hidden throughout New Geneva broadcasted signals that resonated with Vorthak genetic memory structures, amplifying the suppressed trauma that their warrior culture had carefully buried. "Target psychological integration at 70% and climbing," reported her technical assistant. "The Vorthak nervous system is more susceptible to memory amplification than we initially calculated." Foster nodded, adjusting the broadcast parameters. "Increase the emotional resonance by 15%. I want them to feel every moment of pain their ancestors experienced, not just see it." The true horror of humanity's weapon became apparent as the hours passed. The Vorthak weren't being attacked with false memories or artificial trauma. They were being forced to experience the authentic emotional weight of their own history, every conquest their lineage had participated in, every moment of fear and suffering they had caused, every doubt and regret their ancestors had suppressed in the name of honor. War Commander Thokvar watched his elite forces collapse into psychological chaos as the weight of 10,000 years of violence crashed down on them simultaneously. Warriors who had never known fear suddenly couldn't function. Veterans of dozens of campaigns sat in corners weeping for enemies they had killed decades ago. "Evacuate the station," he ordered, but his own voice sounded strange to his ears. His great-great-grandfather's memories were bleeding through, memories of the first Vorthak conquest, of children screaming as their world burned, of the moment when young Thokvar the Elder had first questioned whether glory was worth such suffering. The evacuation became a rout, as Vorthak forces fled New Geneva in complete disorder. But the psychological contamination followed them back to their ships, spreading through the fleet as warriors shared their experiences with comrades who had remained in orbit. Foster watched the chaos with clinical detachment. "Begin Phase 2. Target their command structure specifically." New protocols activated throughout the abandoned station. The quantum communicators began broadcasting more targeted signals, not just ancestral memories now, but direct neural interface with the collective trauma of every species the Vorthak had ever conquered. Suddenly, Vorthak commanders found themselves experiencing the last moments of beings they had killed. They felt the fear of children separated from their parents, the despair of civilizations watching their worlds burn, the agony of countless souls who had died screaming the Vorthak name as a curse. The psychological attack reached its crescendo when the broadcast began including something even more devastating. Go, the voices of potential futures. Vorthak warriors heard their own descendants cursing their names, felt the weight of generations yet unborn who would inherit the karma of endless conquest. Admiral Norton observed the fleet movements from Earth's tactical center. Enemy vessels are maintaining formation, but we're detecting massive communication traffic. They're trying to understand what's happening to them. General Park studied the psychological warfare reports with grim satisfaction. They wanted to conquer humanity through fear. Instead, we're teaching them what real fear looks like. The Vorthak fleet's morale continued to disintegrate as more ships attempted to land on New Geneva, only to flee within hours as their crews experienced the full emotional weight of their species' violent history. Some warriors began refusing orders, claiming they could hear the voices of every being their ancestors had killed demanding justice. War Commander Thokvar found himself alone on his bridge, his crew huddled in their quarters trying to escape the voices that followed them everywhere. He stared at the tactical displays showing the human colony that had somehow turned his invasion fleet into a collection of broken minds. "What are you?" he whispered to the empty space where New Geneva hung like a monument to psychological horror. His answer came not from his communications array, but from his own genetic memories, the voice of his bloodline's first victim, a child from a world whose name had been erased from history. The voice spoke with terrible gentleness. "We are what you made us, Thokvar. We are the price of your glory. We are the weight of your choices. And now, we are coming home." For the first time in Vorthak history, an invasion fleet retreated not because of military defeat, but because they had been forced to confront the true nature of what they had become. The warriors who had conquered 43 worlds found themselves unable to continue their mission, not because they lacked the power, but because they finally understood the cost. Back on Earth, Foster began preparing the next phase of the campaign. New Geneva had been just the beginning. A demonstration of what humanity could do when they chose to fight with minds instead of ships. The real war was about to begin, and it would be fought not in the vacuum of space, but in the deepest recesses of consciousness itself. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had spent millennia perfecting something far more dangerous than weapons of mass destruction. They had mastered the art of turning an enemy's own nature against them, making them complicit in their own defeat. And the Vorthak, who had come to enslave humanity, were about to discover that some prisons are built not from metal and energy, but from memory and regret. 3 weeks after the New Geneva incident, War Commander Thokvar sat in his private quarters aboard the flagship Crushing Victory, staring at a small wooden toy that had been delivered to his ship through means that defied every security protocol in the Vorthak military. The toy was a simple carved animal from his home world, identical to one he had cherished as a child over 2 centuries ago. The original had been destroyed when his family home was demolished to make way for a military academy. No record of its existence should have remained anywhere in the galaxy, yet here it was, sitting on his desk alongside a handwritten note in perfect classical Vorthak script. "We know who you are, Thokvar, son of Kethmar. We know who you love. We know what you fear. Choose wisely." Similar packages had appeared throughout the Vorthak fleet, marked down personal items from warriors' childhoods, photographs of family members on distant worlds, letters written in the handwriting of dead parents. Each delivery was impossible, each message perfectly crafted to target the recipient's deepest psychological vulnerabilities. Foster's teams had spent weeks infiltrating Vorthak data networks, not to steal military secrets but to harvest something far more valuable, our personal histories. Psychological profiles, cultural memories. Every Vorthak citizen's life was an open book to humanity's intelligence services, and they were using that knowledge with surgical precision. Admiral Craighon of the 2nd Battle Group received a music box that played the lullaby his grandmother had sung to him as a child. The melody triggered ancestral memories of peace and innocence that his warrior training had taught him to suppress. For the first time in decades, he remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable, to need protection, to fear the dark. Captain Morthek found a pressed flower from his mate's homeworld on his pillow, along with a detailed analysis of what would happen to her if humanity decided to target Vorthak civilian populations. The analysis was clinical, thorough, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Not because of threats of violence, but because of threats of the same psychological treatment his forces had experienced. The psychological warfare escalated when human agents began appearing in Vorthak high command meetings, not through conventional infiltration or disguise, but through pure audacity and superior intelligence gathering. They would materialize in secured conference rooms, deliver brief messages, and vanish before security could respond. During a critical strategy session aboard the command ship Eternal Conquest, the assembled Vorthak generals were discussing plans to bombardment human worlds when a woman in simple civilian clothes walked through their supposedly impenetrable security perimeter. Dr. Rebecca. Foster stood at the center of the shocked gathering. Her hands empty, her manner calm and conversational. Gentlemen, I thought you might like to know that your current battle plans have a 97% chance of failure, based on psychological factors alone. The Vorthak commanders reached for their weapons, but Foster continued speaking with the authority of someone who knew she held all the advantages. General Thekvar, your son attends the military academy on Korthak Prime. Bright boy. He's been having nightmares about his father's work lately. Admiral Drakmore, your mate is pregnant with your first child. Congratulations. I hope you'll consider what kind of galaxy you want them to inherit. How did you penetrate our security? Demanded Fleet Commander Zethrak, his weapon trained on the seemingly defenseless human. Foster smiled. Commander, you're thinking about this all wrong. We didn't penetrate your security. We are your security. Every system you trust, every protocol you follow, every piece of technology you depend on. We've been inside all of it for weeks. She gestured casually to the holographic displays around the room. Your tactical computers are running analysis programs we designed. Your communication arrays are routing through quantum networks we control. Your life support systems are operating on schedules we've optimized. Her voice remained conversational, but the implications were terrifying. We don't need to destroy your ships, gentlemen. We already own them. The demonstration continued as Foster accessed the room's systems with casual ease, displaying personal files on each commander that included not just military records, but psychological evaluations, family histories, and detailed analyses of their deepest fears and desires. The question, she continued, is whether you want to continue this war knowing that humanity has already won, or whether you'd prefer to discuss terms for a more dignified conclusion to hostilities. General Thekvar's warrior pride warred with the growing realization that his enemy was operating on a level of sophistication that made conventional military thinking obsolete. What do you want from us? Simple, Foster replied. We want you to understand that the choice has always been yours. Surrender, accept relocation assistance, undergo cultural rehabilitation, and live peaceful lives. Continue fighting, and experience the full scope of what humanity considers warfare. She activated a new display showing psychological projection models. Every Vorthak citizen in the galaxy is connected to the same cultural memory networks we've been accessing. If we choose to escalate, we can make your entire species experience the cumulative trauma of every being you've ever killed. Simultaneously, for as long as we deem necessary. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just threatening to defeat the Vorthaka. They were offering to rewrite their fundamental nature as a species. Admiral Drakmore spoke carefully. You would commit genocide against our culture, our very identity. No, Foster corrected. We would offer your people freedom from a culture that has brought nothing but suffering to the galaxy. The choice of whether to accept that freedom would remain theirs. She began walking toward the exit, pausing at the doorway. You have 48 hours to make your decision. Withdraw your forces to neutral space and open negotiations. Or discover what monsters look like when they stop being patient. Foster vanished from the secured room as easily as she had entered, leaving the Vorthak command structure to grapple with the realization that they were fighting an enemy who had turned warfare into a form of therapy, traumatic, comprehensive, and ultimately transformative. Back on Earth, General Park reviewed the psychological warfare reports with mixed feelings. The Vorthak fleet was showing signs of complete organizational breakdown. Entire ship crews were requesting reassignment to non-combat roles. Military commanders were filing formal protests against continuing the war. Some units had begun practicing meditation and conflict resolution techniques, behaviors completely alien to Vorthak military culture. We're not just winning the war, observed Admiral Norton. We're deconstructing their entire civilization. Foster nodded from her position at the monitoring station. The Vorthak built their society on the glorification of violence and the suppression of empathy. We're simply removing those artificial constraints and allowing their natural capacity for emotional growth to emerge. President Cross studied the ethical implications reports that her staff had prepared. And if they refuse to surrender? If they choose to continue fighting despite everything we've shown them? Foster's expression grew cold. Then we implement the final protocols. We don't just make them experience their victim's pain. We make them understand their victim's hope. We show them every potential future where violence is replaced by cooperation. Every possible timeline where their children grow up without the burden of conquest. She paused, considering the full implications of humanity's psychological weapons. Madam President, we've discovered something that no other species in the galaxy possesses. The ability to make warfare itself obsolete by targeting the psychological foundations that make it possible. General Park was studying long-term strategic projections. What happens after the Vorthak surrender? The Galactic Council is watching everything we do. Other species will want to understand our capabilities. Then we'll teach them the same lesson we're teaching the Vorthak, Foster replied. Violence is a choice. Conquest is a choice. War is a choice, and every choice has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate participants. She activated displays showing psychological readiness assessments for the entire Vorthak population. In 72 hours, we'll know whether the Vorthak choose to evolve or remain trapped in a cycle of violence that will ultimately destroy them. Either way, the galaxy will never be the same. The war was entering its final phase, and humanity was about to demonstrate that the most terrifying weapon in the universe wasn't one that destroyed bodies. It was one that offered souls the chance to transform themselves, whether they wanted to or not. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. In the hours since Ambassador Kane's explanation of humanity's psychological warfare campaign, the assembled delegates had struggled to process the implications of what they had witnessed. The Vorthak Empire, a military power that had conquered 43 worlds, had been dismantled not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of the mind itself. Supreme Arbiter. Thexhi's form flickered with rapid computational processes as it accessed reports from across the galaxy. The evidence supports your claims, Ambassador Kane. Vorthak military installations across 17 sectors have been abandoned. Their fleets have withdrawn to neutral space. Refugee camps on 47 worlds are processing former Vorthak citizens seeking new identities. Kane stood calmly in the center of the chamber, his hands still clasped behind his back. The Vorthak are not dead, Honored Arbiter. They are reborn. Given the choice between clinging to a culture of violence and embracing something better, millions chose transformation. Delegate Morthak of the Hegemony Worlds leaned forward, its multiple eyes focusing intently on the human representative. And those who refuse this transformation are living in isolation colonies where they can practice their traditional ways without affecting others, Kane replied. They experience no violence, no conquest, no glory of battle. For a warrior culture, peaceful irrelevance is often worse than death. The biological horror of such precise psychological manipulation sent ripples of unease through the assembly. Delegate Siskora spoke next, its forked tongue tasting the fear in the air. You have demonstrated the ability to destroy an entire species' cultural identity while leaving them physically unharmed. What assurance does this council have that humanity will not employ such weapons against other civilizations? Kane's response was measured and deliberate. The same assurance you had that the Vorthak would not attack peaceful worlds, Honored Delegate. The same assurance you had that any of the 1,000 conflicts across this galaxy would remain contained. He paused, which is to say, none at all. The chamber erupted in angry voices from hundreds of species, but Kane continued speaking over the din. However, I can offer you something better than assurance. I can offer you understanding. He activated a personal holographic display, showing psychological profiles and cultural analyses that made several delegates recoil in recognition. Humanity has spent the past 6 months studying not just the Vorthak, but every major civilization in the galaxy. We understand your fears, your motivations, your deepest cultural foundations. The implications were staggering. If humanity could psychologically dismantle the Vorthak Empire, they could potentially do the same to any species in the galaxy. Kane gestured to specific data points in his presentation. The crystalline communes of Delegate Zifara are terrified of entropy and dissolution. The hegemony worlds fear obsolescence and irrelevance. The peaceful Concord worries that their pacifism makes them vulnerable to aggression. He met each delegate's gaze as he spoke. We know what makes each of your civilizations tick because we've made it our business to know. Delegate Talara of the peaceful Concord vibrated with what translated as deep disturbance. This knowledge could be used to manipulate or destroy any of our societies. It could. Kane agreed. But that's not why we gathered it. He activated a new display showing humanity's long-term strategic planning documents. We studied your civilizations because we wanted to understand how to help them thrive, not how to destroy them. The documents revealed humanity's true intentions, detailed plans for technological sharing, cultural exchange programs, psychological therapy protocols for societies recovering from trauma, and conflict resolution mechanisms that could prevent wars before they started. Admiral Norton appeared on Kane's communication display from Earth. Honored delegates, humanity has no interest in conquest or dominance. We've seen what endless warfare does to a species AR. We've been doing it to ourselves for millennia. We don't want to repeat those mistakes on a galactic scale. Dr. Foster materialized beside Norton, her presence causing visible tension among delegates who had studied reports of her infiltration of Vorthak High Command. What we offer is something unprecedented in galactic history, the ability to end warfare itself by addressing its psychological foundations. Supreme Arbiter, HFY processed this information with visible effort. Explain your proposal, humans. Kane stepped forward. Simple. Humanity seeks full membership in the Galactic Council with a permanent seat and voting rights. In exchange, we share our psychological warfare technology exclusively with the Council for use in conflict resolution and cultural rehabilitation. The chamber fell silent as delegates considered the implications. Humanity was offering to turn their terrifying weapons into tools for peace, but only if they were granted equal status among the galaxy's ruling powers. Delegate Morthak spoke carefully, and if the Council refuses this offer, Kane's smile was neither threatening nor reassuring. Then humanity will continue to handle galactic conflicts in our own way, as we did with the Vorthak. We'll offer our services to any species that requests help with aggressive neighbors or internal cultural problems. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Humanity could become either the galaxy's therapist or its executioner, depending on how they were treated, Foster added. We've already received requests for assistance from 37 civilizations dealing with various forms of cultural trauma or external aggression. It seems that word of our capabilities has spread quickly. The political implications were staggering. If humanity became the go-to solution for interstellar conflicts, they would effectively control galactic politics without needing to conquer a single world. Kane activated a final display, showing the current status of former Vorthak citizens. 7 billion beings have chosen to abandon a culture of violence and embrace new ways of living. Crime rates in their refugee communities are effectively zero. Productivity and innovation have increased by 400%. Mental health indicators show unprecedented improvement. He gestured to specific case studies. Former Vorthak warriors are now serving as mediators in disputes between other species. Their children are excelling in academic and artistic pursuits that their old culture considered worthless. They're happier, healthier, and more productive than they've ever been. The evidence was irrefutable. Humanity hadn't just defeated their enemies, Kamro. They had saved them from themselves. Supreme Arbiter, HFY's form stabilized as its decision-making processes reached completion. The Galactic Council will vote on humanity's membership proposal. All in favor? The chamber filled with voices, lights, and energy patterns as representatives of over 300 civilizations cast their votes. The result was unanimous, Grau, not because they trusted humanity, but because they feared what would happen if they refused. Kane nodded respectfully as the vote concluded. Humanity thanks the Council for this opportunity to serve galactic peace. He paused, his expression growing serious. And to the delegates who voted out of fear rather than friendship, as we understand. Fear is a rational response to the unknown, but we hope that in time you'll come to see us as we truly are. And what are you truly? Asked Delegate Siskora. Kane's final words echoed through the chamber with quiet authority. We are the species that learn to end wars by healing the minds that start them. We are the civilization that discovered that the greatest strength isn't the power to destroy, but the wisdom to transform. He looked around the assembly one last time. The galaxy declared war on humanity. We showed you what monsters look like, but we also showed you what mercy looks like, what healing looks like, what hope looks like. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The question now is whether you want to learn how to become better than what you were, or whether you want to remain trapped in cycles of violence that will eventually destroy you all. The chamber remained silent as humanity's representative left to take his place among the galaxy's ruling powers, carrying with him the promise that warfare itself might finally become obsolete, not through superior weapons, but through superior understanding of the hearts and minds that wield them. For the first time in galactic history, the most feared species in the known universe was also the most hopeful, and perhaps that was the most terrifying transformation of all.